It started with a phone call I'll never forget, not because it was warm or meaningful, but because it disguised manipulation under a velvet tone that made my skin crawl. A voice so sweet it nearly covered up the guilt bombs about to be dropped in my lap while I sat hunched over my scratched-up kitchen table, nursing a bitter cup of cold coffee in my cramped, one-bedroom apartment in Chicago. The kind of place where every inch smelled faintly like ramen steam and exhausted dreams, and I was still in my blazer from a 14-hour corporate grind. My laptop blinking open tabs full of client contracts and revenue forecasts. I was too mentally fried to finish reading when my phone rang and my mom's name flashed on the screen, and something in my gut twisted before I even picked up, because her voice had that treacle-thick artificial warmth she only ever used when she was buttering me up for a favor. And she said, "Cass, sweetie, Laura just got engaged. Isn't that exciting?" In a sing-song tone like this was headline news, like I was supposed to drop everything and squeal with joy. And I blinked in confusion because the last time I checked, Laura had just been dumped by some gym bro she swore was the one. And now she was engaged and planning weddings, apparently. And I hadn't even known she was dating anyone seriously. Hadn't heard a word from her in months. Hadn't gotten a single update because that's how it always was. Laura lived in her own curated spotlight while I existed in the margins. And even as I muttered, yeah, I guess, I could feel the gears turning in my mom's head, already steering the conversation toward something transactional. Because Laura and I hadn't been close in years. Not since she built her entire identity around being the favored daughter, the soft-spoken, perfect-skinned, modestly glamorous darling who always had a boyfriend and a flawless holiday card photo, who called our parents every week and made sure to remind everyone I was the difficult one, the too blunt, career-obsessed, no makeup-wearing disappointment, who lived too far and worked too late and didn't come home for Christmas because I had deadlines, the girl who chose ambition over tradition, and somehow that made me selfish in their eyes, even though I was the one who sent birthday gifts, who paid their cable bills when they couldn't, who never missed a Mother's Day call. But still, I was always the afterthought, the dark sheep in a family photo full of glowing halos, and Laura, she was the crown jewel, the walking Pinterest board, the daughter who could do no wrong. And even though it hurt, even though it dug into my bones every time I got left off group texts or cut out of family plans, I still loved them. I still wanted to belong, still yearned for that rare moment when they'd say, "We're proud of you," without a shadow of comparison. So when my mom started dropping lines like, "We're a little tight on the wedding budget," and "With your big city job, you must be doing so well," I knew where this was heading, could see it coming like a freight train made of glitter and guilt. And sure enough, she went for the kill with, "You think you can help your sister out a little? You know, just this once?" Like I hadn't heard those exact words before. Like they hadn't been uttered during Laura's college tuition scramble, her summer in Paris, her down payment for a new car. Like I hadn't already been the family's silent piggy bank for years. But I said yes, anyway. Said it with a tired smile and a knot in my chest. Told myself this would be the moment that brought us closer, that maybe this grand gesture would finally earn me a place at the heart of the family, instead of watching through the glass. And the second I agreed, it was like opening the floodgates to a wedding monster I couldn't control, because suddenly I was receiving spreadsheets, invoices, Pinterest links, and mood boards. Not from Laura, of course, who didn't even text me a thank you, but from my mom and the wedding planner, and even Laura's fiancé's sister. Like I was the hired financier, not the bride's only sister, not the woman sacrificing sleep and security to fund someone else's fairy tale. And it became very clear, very quickly, that this wasn't helping a little. This was funding the entire damn production, because they sent me the invoice for the $3,200 custom-made dress, and I paid it without question. Sent the wire for the $15,000 vineyard venue with tears in my eyes. Signed off on imported orchids from Thailand because Laura's allergic to lilies. And when I tried to suggest trimming the catering budget or skipping the live harpist, I got hit with icy guilt trips like, "She's your only sister, Cassidy," and "This is her once-in-a-lifetime day," and "You're the successful one now. Don't you want to be part of something beautiful?" And so I kept swiping my card, kept eating instant noodles while Laura picked out engraved champagne flutes, skipped my annual vacation, and stopped contributing to my condo savings just so she could have a horse-drawn carriage, said no to concert tickets, ignored my own birthday, took on freelance projects during weekends just to keep up with the growing costs, and not once, not a single time, did Laura reach out to ask how I was doing. Not even a casual, "Hey, thanks." Because to her, I wasn't a sister. I was a silent investor, a name on a bank transfer, a background player in her princess narrative. And I remember the day she sent me a photo of her in that dress I paid for, standing barefoot on a balcony with wine in hand, golden hour lighting her curls like a goddess. And there was no caption, no message, just the photo, sent like a royal decree. And I stared at it for 10 whole minutes, waiting for some kind of acknowledgement that never came. And still, in my foolish, aching heart, I believed I'd be invited. Thought maybe on the big day I'd walk down the aisle before her, or at least sit in the front row and be recognized as the sister who made it all possible. Imagined a toast where she'd thank me, where people would clap and nod and say, "That's real love." But instead I got silence, complete and devastating silence, until 1 week before the wedding, when I got a group text. Yes, a group text. Not even a phone call, just a bland message that read, "Hey everyone, just a reminder that the ceremony is super intimate, and Laura's keeping it limited to her closest circle. Thanks for understanding." And I stared at that screen in disbelief, thumb frozen above the phone, heart racing so hard I thought I might throw up, because I wasn't on the guest list, wasn't welcome, wasn't even worth a direct message. And when I called my mom in panic, she answered with a sigh and said, "Don't take it personally, Cass. It's Laura's day, and she just doesn't want any tension." And I remember sitting there, phone to my ear, realizing they had taken everything, my money, my time, my energy, and left me with less than nothing, realizing I wasn't just invisible to them. I was disposable. I was useful only until I wasn't needed anymore. And in that moment, something inside me snapped. Not loudly, not dramatically, but cleanly, like a thread finally breaking after too much weight. And the anger didn't come all at once. It came slowly, like cold water trickling over a burn, because I knew, deep down, that I had been used, that I had been sacrificed at the altar of someone else's happiness. And now that my bank account was dry and their dreams were stitched together with my sacrifice, they wanted me to disappear quietly, like I never existed, like I wasn't the reason any of it was even possible. And that's when I realized this wasn't over, not by a long shot. I hadn't even fully let go of the stupid hope that I'd be asked to stand beside her on her big day, when my phone buzzed with a group text, so devoid of heart, it might as well have been written by a stranger A screen-lit betrayal sent without ceremony or context, or even the decency of a phone call. Just my mother, my own mother, typing like a PR rep for someone else's mess, coldly writing, "Cassidy, we've talked and decided it's best if you don't attend the wedding. Laura doesn't want any drama on her big day." And those words didn't feel real at first, like maybe I'd misread them in a haze of exhaustion, or maybe autocorrect had turned something innocent into something cruel. But no, I read it again, and then again, my stomach curling tighter with each pass, like a snake around my ribs, squeezing until I couldn't breathe, and all I could feel was confusion crashing into disbelief, and then bleeding into this full body ache of rejection so sharp it made my throat close, my fingers twitching against the phone as I instinctively called Laura, needing to believe this was a joke, or at least a misunderstanding, that she'd answer with a guilty laugh and say, "Oh my God, no, of course you're invited." But it rang twice and dumped straight into voicemail, like the message was waiting, practiced, and I left no message, just stared at the screen with burning eyes. Then called Mom, knowing, just knowing, she'd make it right, but hers went to voicemail too, like they'd both powered off their humanity together, and I was sitting there, dumbfounded, heart cracking open in a way that felt slow and surgical when Laura's text came through, her tone so breezy and detached I could barely recognize the person I grew up with in it. "It's just that you've always been a little much. I don't want the vibe ruined. No hard feelings. Hope you understand." And the screen blurred through my tears, not because I didn't see it coming deep down, but because reading it made the truth feel like a bullet, sudden, irreversibly damaging, and heartless. Because here she was, the woman whose fantasy I single-handedly bankrolled, telling me I was an aesthetic liability, a vibe risk, too much to be visible at a party I paid for, and I could barely type through my shaking hands when I sent the only thing I could think to say. "After everything I've done," and the minutes stretched out like hours as I watched the screen, waiting, hoping, obsessively checking if the message was delivered, if the three dots would appear, if anything would come back to me with some hint of regret. But there was nothing, not a breath of response, just the cruel void of silence that felt louder than any scream. And in those days that followed, I went numb, floating through my routines like a ghost haunting her own apartment, unable to focus at work, unable to sleep, without replaying every sacrifice I made for people who now treated me like an inconvenience, a liability, a stain they could bleach out of their fairy tale. And on the third day, when my spirit was fraying like overused thread, my dad finally called, and for half a second I let myself believe he was calling to say it was a mistake, that of course I was wanted there, that he'd fix it, but instead his voice came through thin and hesitant, like he was apologizing without actually saying the words, and he began with, "Cass, you know we're just trying to keep the peace." And everything inside me went still, not in calm, but in calculation, because he wasn't defending me. He wasn't even acknowledging the betrayal. He was rationalizing it, papering over it with diplomatic half-truths, meant to make me feel like the problem, like my presence was the disruption, rather than their exclusion. And then he said, as if offering some pitiful olive branch, "Maybe you could come to the reception after the ceremony. Just, keep it low-key. Don't wear anything too bold." And that phrase, those exact words, hit me like a backhand to the soul. Like he was saying, my existence was loud, my personality was messy, my very being was inconvenient, unless diluted. And I stood there in my kitchen, gripping the counter so tightly, My knuckles turned white as I realized they didn't just want me absent from the ceremony. They wanted me erased from the narrative entirely. A ghost at best. An ATM with a name. A disposable background character they could crop out of the photo album and pretend had never been part of the fairy tale they sold to their friends. And I didn't respond to my father because I couldn't trust myself to say anything that wasn't fire. And instead, I hung up, slowly, deliberately, like closing a door I knew would never open the same way again. And for the first time in years, I didn't feel sad. I felt still, focused, sharp-edged, in a way that scared me and comforted me at the same time, because it was like something inside me had finally snapped into alignment, and I walked to the mirror in my hallway, staring at my reflection under the cold overhead light, seeing the woman they tried to ignore, tried to label as dramatic, tried to frame as difficult. And I whispered to myself, not angry, but certain, they think I'm nothing but a checkbook and a shadow. And in that moment, I didn't cry, didn't scream. I planned, quietly, slowly, a storm forming not in fury, but in precision. Because if they thought they could take my money, take my trust, take my love, and then tell me to shrink for the sake of their curated image, they had forgotten everything about the woman I'd become, the woman they helped forge through years of exclusion and criticism and quiet shame. And the thing they never considered was that I remember details, I document, I analyze, and I wait. And in that moment, I started to think not about how to make them love me again, but how to make them feel every ounce of what they made me swallow. The humiliation, the guilt, the betrayal. And I smiled, not out of joy, but from the strange comfort of clarity, because now I had nothing to lose, and a woman with nothing to lose is a danger they should have never created. And they were about to learn that the sister they cast aside wasn't just a forgotten RSVP. She was the headline they never saw coming. I sat still for a long time after I hung up on my father, not moving, not breathing, just staring at my reflection in the black screen of my dead phone. My hands clenched so tightly, my knuckles turned pale, and I don't know if it was pain or rage or the humiliation pounding through my bloodstream like a second pulse. But I knew, deep in my gut, that they didn't just betray me. They discarded me, and they did it with the confidence of people who thought I would never fight back, never bite the hand that fed them while calling it a favor. But what they failed to realize, what they underestimated so brutally, was that I had finally hit the kind of silence that precedes a storm, the kind of stillness that doesn't mean defeat, but strategy. So I didn't throw things. I didn't cry. I didn't text a single word in return, because I wasn't going to give them the satisfaction of watching me bleed. No. Instead, I reached for a pen, tore a sheet from my old college notebook, and began writing down every single thing I had paid for, every name, every number, every invoice, because while they were busy dressing up betrayal in white satin and borrowed nostalgia, I was going to dress vengeance in precision and patience, starting with the most delicate detail. The florist, the same one Laura had squealed about on the phone, saying how elegant and understated her arrangements would be. All peonies and garden roses and delicate sprays of baby's breath, arranged like a Pinterest fantasy. And guess whose name was on the contract? Whose credit card held the deposit? Mine. So I called, and I spoke calmly, clearly, stating that the event was canceled from my end, that I would not authorize final payment. And the woman on the other end, a kind-sounding Nancy, asked if everything was all right, to which I simply replied, "Plans changed." And with that, I moved down the list like a soldier marching through enemy lines, crossing off names with surgical control. The catering company that had designed a 4-course menu for over 150 guests, I canceled it. The vegan dessert vendor with the gold-flecked macarons Laura insisted on, to appease her influencer bridesmaids, I canceled it. The string quartet she bragged about on Instagram stories, I contacted their manager and canceled the booking. The makeup team, the hairstylist, the nail tech set to arrive at 6 a.m. to pamper her bridal party. While I apparently wasn't vibe appropriate, I canceled all of them. Every vendor whose service I personally secured and funded was removed like a game piece swept off a rigged board. And I made sure to do it with grace, with respect, because these weren't the enemies. They were tools in a game I had unknowingly funded and now fully controlled, and once the mass unraveling began, I moved on to phase 2. The parts I deliberately left intact because they were far more useful active than canceled, like the venue, which I had booked under my name. But rather than canceling it outright, I sent a polite email to the coordinator requesting confirmation of access codes, floor plan PDFs, and AV system login details for the tech team. Except the tech team was me, sitting in my apartment with my laptop and years of quiet observation finally blooming into something lethal. And then came the photographer, a name I hadn't thought of in years until this very moment. Kyle Harper, an old college friend, a brief, almost boyfriend, who had once taken black and white photos of me dancing barefoot in the rain and said, "You belong in art." A man with talent, heart, and a lingering debt of gratitude after I helped him land his first internship. And when I called him, I wasn't sure he'd answer. But he did. And when I asked if he was still working the Marshall wedding on Saturday, he laughed and said, "Cass? Wow, long time. Yeah, booked it through your email, remember?" And I smiled as I said, "I do. I need a favor, a big one." And he listened as I told him that I wanted every moment of that wedding captured. Every smile, every speech, every tear, but that he should send the raw files to me first, unedited, unfiltered, and especially not to the bride. And when he asked why, I didn't give him the full truth. I just said, "I have my reasons." And he replied with a slow, knowing hum and said, "I trust you." And with that, the fuse was lit, and I turned my attention to the slideshow, the one Laura had spent months perfecting, dragging me into Zoom calls to help her adjust the timing, crying over how important it was that the photos fade just so into that awful song she chose. Something about stars aligning and lifelong dreams, and she never even thought to lock me out of the project, never imagined that the same hands that curated it could corrupt it. So I logged into our shared drive and sat staring at the final version for a long time before I opened it, watching the preview clip play over and over, engagement photos in golden hour, childhood clips of Laura in glittery costumes, sappy notes from her fiancé. And then I clicked edit because I didn't want to destroy it. No, that would have been too petty, too small. I wanted to embed reality into fantasy, cut truth into illusion. So I stitched in exactly 90 seconds of still frames and screenshots, each one meticulously designed. Receipts with my name and card number blurred just enough for drama, email confirmations showing my name as the booking client, bank transfers for the honeymoon suite, with timestamps, text messages from Mom asking for just a little help, and from Laura begging for just one more dress fitting, all set to the same sweeping music she chose, so that when it played, the room would gasp before anyone could reach the projector. And I saved the version with a coded file name and uploaded it back to the folder they still believed was safe. And when that was done, I sat back in my chair, not smiling, not gloating, but steady, grounded, like the calm before a courtroom verdict. Because this wasn't just revenge, it was revelation. And I didn't need anyone to clap for me. Didn't need an audience, because my win wasn't in their reaction. It was in the clarity of knowing they would never erase me again. And as I looked around my modest apartment, with its cracked tile and secondhand shelves, I felt more powerful than I ever had in my sister's shadow. Because I was done being the forgotten funder, the disposable sibling, the convenient success story they paraded only when it served them. I was reclaiming the narrative, not by shouting, not by begging, but by doing what I do best, solving quietly, efficiently, ruthlessly. And come Saturday, when the lights dimmed and the screen glowed, and the truth they tried to hide lit up the room in crystal clarity, they wouldn't even see me coming, but I would be there, in every flower that never arrived, every entree that never made it to the table, every gasp in the room as my name flashed across the screen. And that, to me, would be louder than any toast they had planned. Saturday arrived with a sun too bright for the kind of storm I was about to unleash. And while they slipped into pastel gowns and polished shoes, believing they were stepping into the most pristine day of their lives, I sat in my apartment, coffee going cold in my hands, staring at my laptop screen as the digital clock ticked closer to 4:30 p.m., the exact time their slideshow was scheduled to play across the gilded ballroom wall. And I wasn't nervous, not even a little, because I had nothing left to fear from people who had already gutted me clean and tossed the parts that didn't match their decor. And as my email chimed with a new message from Kyle, subject line, "Everything you asked for," I clicked the preview and saw them, my family, smiling, laughing, clinking champagne, Laura glowing in white like a bride carved from a magazine spread. And I didn't blink, didn't flinch, because I knew that glow was fake, that every inch of satin wrapped around her was funded by the sister she publicly erased. And when 4:28 hit, I whispered, "Now," not like a command, but like a prayer to every broken version of myself who had ever been made to feel like too much or never enough. And across town, under crystal chandeliers and soft string music, the projector began to hum, the guests clinked forks against glasses, and the room went dim as Laura took center stage beside her groom, hand in hand, eyes sparkling as the opening bars of her chosen love song swept across the room. And then came the first slide, just like she planned, her toddler photo in pigtails, then prom night with mom fixing her corsage, then a blurry photo of her and the fiancé at some fall festival. And people smiled, they cooed, they leaned in, until slide number 15, when everything fractured. Because that's when the background music didn't skip, but the image did. A sudden flash of a Wells Fargo transfer. $5,000, C. Wynn, time-stamped, and the room hiccuped. Someone gasped, someone else whispered, "Wait, what was that?" And then came a wedding dress invoice addressed to my email, followed by a florist confirmation under my name, then screenshots of text messages from our mother asking for emergency help with deposits, and it all unfolded without warning, seamlessly stitched between innocent memories. So the audience had to squint, had to reprocess what they just saw, wondering if this was some modern ironic twist or a technical glitch. But no one moved to stop it. Not at first, because the horror was blooming too fast, like a mushroom cloud of truth rising in a ballroom that had never prepared for fallout. And I imagined Laura's face, that signature tight smile twisting into confusion. Then panic. The bride. Everyone came to adore, now standing beneath a screen that told a very different story. One of manipulation, exploitation, and carefully veiled cruelty. And when the photo of the honeymoon suite deposit hit, a $2,300 receipt with my masked card, the room fell into a stunned silence, so thick it probably rattled the champagne glasses. And still, the slideshow didn't stop, because embedded within every clip was a little more truth. Another receipt, a screenshot of a time I'd been guilted into one more thing, ending finally, perfectly, on a quote Laura had once posted to her social feed. Something about family being everything, in elegant script over a rose background. Except this time, underneath it, I'd edited in my own quote, subtle but damning, as long as you don't outshine the favorite. And that was the final slide, the last nail in the coffin of her perfect image. And as the music faded, there was no applause, only the quiet buzz of humiliation simmering like boiling oil trapped under fine linen. And I didn't have to see it to know how it played out. Didn't need to be there physically to hear the whispers starting like wildfire at table 12. The glances between bridesmaids, the tension in my mother's jaw as she realized what had just happened, or the sudden hush when Laura, red-faced, voice trembling, likely demanded the projector be shut off, only to realize no one moved fast enough to spare her, because the room wasn't hers anymore. It belonged to the truth now. And even Kyle, who texted me minutes later with a simple, "Holy shit," confirmed it. I've never seen a crowd flip like that. People started asking who you were. Some clapped. I think your dad tried to yell, but even the staff just stood still. And I read his words like poetry, each one sliding into place, like a puzzle I never thought I'd complete. And when I got to the last part of his message, "You won without being in the room," I smiled, not because I was happy, not because I got revenge, but because I felt seen, finally, deeply seen. And there was something devastatingly healing in that, in knowing I didn't have to scream to be heard, didn't have to show up in designer heels and shove my way into a moment that was never meant to include me, because I had already carved my name into it with truth. And no matter how many times they deleted me from their family group chat or holiday card lists, this moment, this rupture, couldn't be undone. And I pictured Laura storming off in tears, probably blaming the venue or tech guy or some hacker, while Mom scrambled to save face with relatives from Idaho or Kentucky who now stared at her with new eyes. And maybe Dad tried to wave it all off as Cassidy being dramatic again. But they couldn't outrun the reality that everything they built, every lie they told, now came with receipts, literally projected onto a 20-foot wall in HD clarity. And no matter how fast they tried to move past it, the damage was permanent. The illusion cracked, the golden child's halo dimmed by the sister they never thought would matter. And as I closed my laptop and leaned back into the silence of my apartment, I felt a calm wash over me, not of victory, but of reclamation, because I hadn't ruined anything. I'd simply returned what was mine: credit, truth, presence, and most of all, dignity. And while they cleaned up their broken fairy tale, I sipped my now cold coffee and whispered, that was for me, because in the end, I wasn't the villain they painted me to be. I was just the forgotten daughter who finally remembered her worth and dared to let the world see the parts they tried so hard to hide. I didn't feel the need to post some grand announcement or burn bridges publicly, because the most satisfying revenge isn't loud. It's the kind that echoes in silence, where every notification they don't get, every locked folder they can't access, and every fading memory they can't preserve becomes a consequence they crafted with their own selfish hands. And as I stared at my laptop that night, watching the tiny spinning wheel beside Laura's shared album folder disappear once I hit delete, I felt no guilt, no hesitation, just a steady calm I hadn't known in years. I didn't do it in a rage or from some place of childish spite. I did it because I finally realized that being family doesn't mean being a fool with an open wallet and a duct-taped heart begging for scraps of affection. And when I went into the back end of the private honeymoon fund, I'd carefully built under my name, with withdrawal protections and staggered deposits, something I intended as a surprise after the wedding to cover their extravagant Maldives suite. I didn't hesitate to deactivate it completely, watching the balance roll neatly into my personal savings, not because I needed it, but because they hadn't earned it. And as I looked at my empty inbox, devoid of thank yous or apologies or even a check-in to see how I was holding up after they collectively carved me out of my own family story, like some inconvenient footnote, I decided I was finished playing the role they'd assigned me, the workhorse, the backup plan, the forever giver. And so I began to let go, not dramatically, not emotionally, just purposefully, like deleting old files you no longer need, memories you've outgrown, names that no longer fit. Weeks passed, like fogged glass, fading back into clarity, and I started sleeping better, not because I'd won anything, but because I'd finally stopped trying to prove my worth to people who were committed to ignoring it. And then, out of nowhere, my phone rang. It was Laura, and for the briefest moment, I thought maybe, just maybe, she'd come to her senses, that she'd call not to beg, but to recognize the cruelty in what she'd done, to finally say the words I'd waited my entire adult life to hear. I'm sorry, but instead, her voice hissed down the line, like venom wrapped in satin, saying, "You humiliated me, Cassidy. Do you have any idea how cheap I looked when the guests started asking why there weren't any centerpieces or why the catering disappeared halfway through dessert?" And I didn't rush to fill the silence, didn't apologize, didn't shrink or deflate under her accusations, because I finally understood that she wasn't angry I'd hurt her. She was angry I'd stopped letting her use me. And so I let that truth hover between us before I replied, calm and level, "You didn't need my help with that, Laura. You did that all on your own." And just like that, she hung up, not because she'd said what she needed to say, but because she realized she no longer had control. And that was the last time I heard her voice, the final syllables of a one-sided relationship gasping for air as I cut off its oxygen supply. And though part of me expected the silence to feel lonely, it didn't. It felt like peace, the kind that settles in your bones when you stop waiting for broken people to hand you closure they're incapable of giving. And yes, my parents reached out eventually, as I knew they would, but not with warmth or humility. No, Mom called, with her signature passive-aggressive tone, and opened with, "You know, family doesn't do that to each other, Cassidy." As if I was the villain, as if she hadn't watched me spend months pouring my salary and soul into Laura's dream day, just to be tossed out like a crumpled receipt. And this time, I didn't cry or explain or grovel for a place at their emotionally bankrupt table. I just replied, evenly and honestly, "Exactly. Family doesn't," and I let the silence ring, loud and final, before hanging up. Not because I was angry anymore, but because I was done explaining to people who weren't listening. And in that quiet afterward, I felt something bloom. Not revenge, not relief, but resolve, the kind that shapes itself into action, into something with meaning. And that's when I decided to take everything they tried to break in me and build something stronger. With the money I had saved, originally meant for centerpieces and fondant and fairy lights, I launched a nonprofit, something that would make meaning out of the madness. And I called it No More Invites, a name that came to me in a flash, born from the message that started it all. And within weeks, I had a mission, a team, a tiny rented office space, and women, dozens at first, then hundreds, who reached out not just to donate, but to share, to cry, to admit they'd been used, dismissed, exploited by their own families, the way I had. And when I hosted our first support group meeting, I stood in front of that circle of survivors, their eyes wide with recognition and exhaustion. And I told my story, not the filtered version, not the polished one, but the raw truth, the cold text message, the silence, the wedding I built but wasn't welcome at, and I saw it in their faces. That sharp inhale, that tight nod, that flicker of strength trying to rise up again. And I knew in that moment that my story wasn't just mine anymore. It was theirs. It was every woman who'd been used for her love and loyalty and discarded when she finally asked for respect. And as I walked out of that room that night, I felt lighter, not because the pain was gone, but because I'd given it purpose, transformed it into something that might outlast me. And now, whenever someone asks me about revenge, I smile. Not because I got even, but because I got free. And freedom is the kind of revenge they never see coming, the kind they can't control or erase or guilt you out of. And every time I tell this story, whether at a conference, a fundraiser, or a whisper in a support circle, I finish with the same words. Revenge doesn't always come with flames or fury. Sometimes it looks like you walking away and them watching your back as you never look back. Because real power is knowing you could destroy them and choosing instead to rebuild yourself, louder, bolder, and absolutely unstoppable.